series. And I think we decided we'll generally hold questions till the end, but if you do type them in as a chat, then we can be accumulating those as things go along. Anything else you want to say, Nadine or Christine? Or I'll go right ahead.
Clark, can you all hear me? This is Kris.
Yeah.
Just there will be a point about halfway through where I'll stop and take some questions because there's kind of a first part and second part. So you can be ready for that. So you could either be ready to ask your questions then, or you can go ahead and put them in the chat, and that way, you know, as you think of them, you could be writing them down in the chat. Great.
And I think, Nadine, you started the recording. Or someone did?
I started one.
Yeah, okay.
Was that, okay. I've never done that before.
Okay, that's great. Okay. We'd like to have that.
Okay.
Okay, I'll mute myself and then take it away, Kris.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Oh, I think it's this one. Can everybody see that? Did everybody see? Is everyone on the slideshow? Hello?
I think everyone's muted right now, Kris.
Okay, but you're not. So but you can see it?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Climate Reality Project.
Thank you. All right. So founded and chaired by former Vice President Al Gore, the Climate Reality Project is dedicated to catalyzing a global solution to the climate crisis by making urgent action a necessity across every level. So Washington Climate Reality is a local chapter, and we have about 150 members. I took the Climate Reality Project leadership training in 2017 and co-founded the chapter with some other folks who had taken the leadership training. I think we have a couple folks on this call who had done that. So, so I'm here tonight really as a Climate Reality Project member, more than a Huron River Watershed Council member, but both organizations certainly work towards fighting climate change. So this is the first picture of the Earth fully illuminated that any of us ever saw. And it was taken on the last day of the Apollo missions, and it changed the way that humanity thought about our common home. This is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day this year. And in large part, that Earth Day, I think that was such a moving time because people had seen this and realized, you know, what a vulnerable place Earth really was. So for this talk, there's only 3 questions really about the climate crisis. One is, must we change? I'm going to talk about that first. And then, will we change? Or can we change? And then, will we change? So I'm going to start out in space. The sky, it's not a vast and limitless expanse the way it appears as we stand here on Earth and look up into the sky, right? In reality, it's just a thin shell of atmosphere surrounding the planet, and Carl Sagan likened it to the thickness of the lacquer painted on a classroom globe. So it's really thin and vulnerable. Yet we're putting 110 million tons of human-made global warming pollution into the atmosphere every single day. And so just some quick basic science here of global warming, which has been understood by scientists since the 1800s and by anyone who took middle grade science since, you know, they were talking about this in the 70s when I was in school. So energy from the sun comes to Earth in the form of light, and that energy is absorbed by the Earth and that warms it. And that's why we have life on Earth. Some of the energy is re-radiated from the Earth in the form of heat. Some of it is trapped by our atmosphere. So that's a good thing, right? But like I said, we've been pumping these global warming greenhouse gases into the atmosphere through all sorts of practices, agricultural practices, forest burning, transportation, all kinds of other ways. Now, the main cause of these rising temperatures is from the burning of fossil fuels. So the largest source of global warming pollution is the burning of fossil fuels. They still provide more than 80% of the Earth's energy. And their use has gone up dramatically since World War II. Notice in the last few years, though, there's been a little bit of a leveling off. And so we're going to talk about that later in the talk, about that leveling off. And as a result of this pollution, global temperatures have been rising dramatically. So 16 of the 17 hottest years on records have occurred since the year 2001. And this year, 2020, is on track to become yet the warmest again. So we're seeing quite a trend. And so heat itself is a problem in many parts of the world and in many parts of this country. So heat affects not only people, but animals, crops, and our weather. And so parts of our earth are actually going to become uninhabitable for humans just due to the heat itself. And yet most of this heat, more than 90% of it is trapped by our atmosphere, is going into the oceans. And so this is what makes storms like hurricanes, typhoons, and cyclones stronger and more destructive. So I'm going to go through a litany of what we've seen in the last few years in that realm. So August 2015, you might remember we had 3 Category 4 hurricanes occurred simultaneously. That's the first time that's ever happened. These warmer ocean temperatures are like fuel for these tropical storms. So Hurricane Harvey crossed waters in the Gulf of Mexico that were 7 degrees hotter than normal and deeper. And so that is causing more churning, and it's making the hurricanes quicker and stronger, and they last longer as well. So during that time, Nederland, Texas received 5 feet of rain, and that's the greatest single storm rainfall total on record in the US. Then we have Hurricane Maria. This was in 2017. People probably remember how the horrors of that, and Puerto Rico is still recovering. And now we have Hurricane Michael in 2018, the 3rd strongest storm ever to hit the US. And Dorian. So I don't even kind of remember that, or Barry, I'm getting confused already, but Barry in 2019, I don't even really remember this one. So 23 inches of rain is just becoming commonplace and normal, I guess, as people like to say. Bahamas received over 36 inches of rain due to Dorian. The strongest storm at landfall ever recorded. This is Dorian's destruction in the Bahamas. And so that's just the last, what, 5 or 6 years. So this, I'm going back to a little basic science, so we can see that this extra heat is disrupting the water cycle. So the amount of water vapor that evaporates off the oceans increases as the ocean warms. Then that water vapor is carried over the land and then falls in these big precipitation events. So it's not just hurricanes, but these big precipitation events that kind of like I'm looking out my window right now. And then when the land can't absorb all the water, we get large downpours and floods and mudslides. So these extreme events have produced more rain and become more common since the 1950s. This is a supercell storm in Glasgow, Montana in 2010. Extreme precipitation events lead to record flooding, and it's happening all over the world. This is a shorter version of a 2 or more hour slideshow presentation that Vice President Gore does. And there are just picture after picture after picture of flooding just like this, but all over the world, in Japan, in Russia, in Britain, in Spain, in Argentina, just everywhere. So Houston has been hit by 10 major flood events and 3 1 in 1,000 year downpours, right, in the last 4 years. So think about what a 1 in 1,000 year storm is. If people, maybe you have questions about that, we can go over it, but that basically means you're only really supposed to see them every 1,000 years. So think of what happened 1,000 years ago. So think about all the things that happened in the last 1,000 years, and we weren't supposed to have seen this since Columbus came to the US, and since we've had all these changes. And think of how much time should have gone past between these storms, and yet we've seen 3 in the last 4 years. This is really not normal. So people probably remember back in 2019, US farmers were prevented from planting 20 million acres due to that heavy rainfall. That really was a big thing here in Michigan. I know a lot of the farmers in our watershed were not able to get their crops in. And so the same thing that is making it rain so much is also causing a drought, because that heat is sucking the water out of the soil. And so in precipitation patterns change, so some places get more rainfall, other places get less. So those patterns can lead to drought, In southern Brazil, for example, they suffered a devastating drought in 2015 and 2016. And there's another slide I didn't show, but there's a map that shows the drought that's been going on in Central America, and it basically follows the same geographic area is where all the migration is happening from Central America. I know that there's a lot of violence and political strife going on there, but for a large part of that is due to drought conditions that people are unable to grow their food or to stay in their farms. People might remember also in the news that Cape Town in South Africa was at risk of running out of water. So the higher temperatures also have a direct effect on wildflowers. We've certainly seen a lot of that, and you can see the graph that the fire incidences kind of follow years where you have higher temperatures, which kind of makes sense. We remember the terrible wildfires that happened all year in Australia. And the average area burned each year in California has increased 500% since 1970. So the number of climate-related extreme weather events has been going up worldwide. In 2016 alone, these disasters have caused losses totaling over $175 billion. This is a map showing global tree cover loss from 2021 to 2015. So you can see that we've got wildfires causing forest loss, agriculture, forestry, and so it's only making the deforestation problem worse. Glaciers are melting. This glacier in southwest Greenland almost completely melted by 2013. NASA's precisely measured the decline in the mass of ice in both Greenland and Antarctica, and all this melting is raising sea levels. So this flooding occurred in Miami Beach on a sunny day with no rain. So this isn't from a hurricane or a high storm. This is a high tide. These are happening regularly now in Miami Beach and several coastal cities all over the world. So top 10 cities at risk from sea level rise by assets. So you can see Miami is right there. And then in terms of by population at risk, I believe Miami's still there, but we see all of the other cities. So many of the huge cities in developing countries are very much in danger. And as they become uninhabitable, where are these people going to go and live? So to that, the Department of Defense has been warning about this and warning about all kinds of national security reasons to be worried about climate change. One is the refugee crises. Heat stress is beginning to decrease crop yields all over the world. And it's not just crop yields, but the increase in carbon dioxide also decreases the nutrient content of many of those crops. Climate change is also a medical emergency. I think Larry Junk talked about this last week. Infectious diseases, heat stress, air pollution, and waterborne diseases, they're all influenced by this changing climate. And so these are tropical diseases on the move. You know, as warmer temperatures spread around the globe, those often vectors like mosquitoes, they can live in areas that they didn't used to be able to live in. And this is combined, of course, with globalization, which is happening, and we're seeing the effects of that right now with the pandemic. And so large parts of the globe are going to become uninhabitable. And I mean, when people started talking about global warming, I remember the big issues were, you know, the polar bears and what are the animals going to do as the climate changes. And now we're talking about what are the people going to do with climate change. So, you know, we're now risking losing up to 50% of all land-based species. The worst extinction event since the extinction of the dinosaurs 65 million years ago is going to be upon us. People, I'm sure, have heard about coral bleaching, and this is showing coral bleaching conditions in Hawaii, severe bleaching. And so what's going to happen here in Michigan? Now, I will say that we're kind of lucky in that we're not on a coast. We don't tend to have a lot of wildflowers. We have wildfires. We have a lot of fresh water in the Great Lakes. So that's great, right? Well, we're not going to be totally escaping from the impacts of climate change. We're going to see those warmer temperatures, not just warmer temperatures, but in the nighttime. So we're not going to have maybe as many of those nice cool nights after a hot day. More potential for extreme heat. We're going to have shorter winters, and those of us who are skiers have already been complaining about that. We're going to have more total precipitation and more severe events like those rain bombs I was talking about earlier. And so here's what we have, some of the data. The Michigan's average annual temperature has already risen 2 degrees Fahrenheit over the last 30 years. Heat wave days in Michigan are expected to jump from 15 per year now to nearly 42 a year by 2050, 80 to 95 per year by 2100, the average summer temp. So we're going to have more projected hot days. And if you think about what our climate is going to be like in terms of what other state we're going to seem like, we're kind of migrating southward. We're going to be more like maybe Arkansas or Oklahoma. Now, my husband is from Oklahoma. He grew up in Oklahoma, and he couldn't wait to go to a college that was further north, like in Michigan. So that's where we met, at the University of Michigan. So I guess we're heading back down to Oklahoma. So extreme rain and flooding is one of Michigan's most significant threats. You might remember some of these floods. And then I think it was last year, the year before, there was 7 or 8 inches of rain in the UP and in Marquette, and they had to call a national emergency. The projected change in average precipitation, 11%, 2 to 4 inches. And then extreme precipitation. So again, that precipitation will be falling in storms. And here's a graph that kind of shows the same thing. Declining Great Lakes ice cover. I'm sure that people who live closer to the lakes are seeing this. Annual average ice cover declined by 71% already between 73 and 2010. Lake temperatures are rising faster than nearby air temperatures. In Lake Superior, it's actually warmed twice as fast. So it's Lake Superior is a lot warmer than it used to. The changing winter precipitation is important. So we've had shorter winters, which is more precipitation falling as rain instead of snow, and less snow accumulation, but more lake effect precipitation. So in some areas we'll see, and we have seen, increased snowfall, but the warmer temperatures might make that snow won't stick around as long. We'll have agricultural impacts, and we've already seen some of that. If we remember in 2012, that big, weird 70-degree days that we had in March caused the trees to flower out earlier, and then there was a big freeze, and we basically had no cherries, we had no apples that year. Algal bloom. So this is something that we work on at the Huron River Watershed Council. Those produce dangerous conditions for people and wildlife. You might remember the city of Toledo had to shut down its drinking water plant due to an algal bloom in Lake Erie. So the warmer lake temperatures, longer warm season, increasing extreme precipitation, and then the increased nutrients from fertilizer runoff and sewer discharges that are happening because of farming practices and urban development. They're culminating in an increase in the frequency of these algal blooms, not just on Lake Erie, but in our watershed in those inland lakes, like I believe Ore Lake, Brighton Lake. So the other inland lakes are starting to see algal blooms. And so we're seeing a shifting ecosystems. The trees, the forests are going to be shifting northward as those temperatures change to the north. So we're going to be seeing some of those, the forests that give us those beautiful fall colors are going to be migrating further north. So the cost of carbon, I've gone over quite a few of these. I won't go over all of them. If you want to check in on the 2 or 3 hour presentation, we can organize that. So the question is, must we change? And so I'm going to open it up to questions briefly. If we want to unmute folks, if there's any questions in the chat.
No questions in the chat yet.
Okay.
And people can unmute themselves on their own.
Maybe a second to think, and then I'll move on.
Okay.
Can we get copies of these slides, or you said they were from Al Gore? How do we get
Yes.
copies?
There's one way you can get this. I can well, first of all, we are recording this, so there's that will be available. When people sign up to become a climate reality leader, for the training, that's what we're being trained in, is how to give this talk. And so Vice President Gore, I wish it was President, Vice President Gore gives the talk twice during the 3-day training. And so we learn about, you know, best ways to go out and organize for getting the word out. And then we learn how to do the presentation. Then we learn all kinds of other things about climate change and about organizing and politics, and also it's a really, really great training. Unfortunately, they've had to cancel 3 of them now because of the pandemic. Well, it was going to be in Detroit this year. Hopefully it'll be in Detroit soon. But we're not supposed to really share the slides. That being said, let me know. We've been using them. We share them a bit between us and CCL, and you know, it's kind of a don't ask, don't tell situation. But I can talk if people are interested in getting some of these slides. We can maybe you can give me your email and we can talk about it. Put it that way.
Thank you.
Kris, we have a question from Nancy. Will the Great Lakes absorb the CO2 and will it acidify the Great Lakes? And
ooh, that's a good question. That's a good question anyway. I mean, I remember the big acid rain issue back in the 70s and 80s. And I remember that in the Midwest and the Great Lakes, it wasn't as big of an issue because our region the basic geology of it is very basic. And so the acidity, it can absorb a lot of the acidity of that. So, and I have not heard that is going to be a future concern. So perhaps that's still the case.
Kris?
Yes.
That's a superb question. I don't know the answer to it. I mean, what's very well understood is the acidification of the water in the oceans. It's understood on an empirical basis, and the implications of it are also very, very well understood.
Yes.
Now, I have to, maybe this is not legitimate, but I have to assume that the same thing is going on with regard to inland lakes. I haven't heard anything about it.
I haven't heard anything about it in any freshwater lakes.
I think we all ought to look into it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It could be that the life in the oceans is more delicate and therefore more prone to damage from acidification. But
the corals, yeah.
Yes, exactly. I see no reason why the water of an inland lake would not acidify to the same extent, because as the water becomes a carbon sink, one would assume that it would do the same thing.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm going to ask. We have the Climate Reality Hub, and I'm going to put that question on there tonight.
Right.
Yeah, I've just checked on the web, and I have a headline here: excess carbon is making freshwater lakes more acidic at triple the rate of oceans.
Oh, well, there you go. I guess it's a problem that hasn't risen as high as, you know, wildfires and smog and particulate pollution and everything. Yeah, it's good.
Kris, you mentioned that Lake Superior is heating at twice the rate of other.
Yeah.
I guess of the oceans. Is there?
No, twice the rate of the other Great Lakes.
Of the other Great Lakes. It's a deep lake relative to the other ones, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's the thinking about that?
I think I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Why it's warming so much? Probably because it's the coldest, maybe.
Yeah. Okay.
Also the furthest north, and the polar regions are getting hot faster.
Right.
So.
Right.
Oh,
I was thinking that too, but then again, I mean,
Yeah.
it's not really that much further north. I mean, it's not that much closer to the polar regions, really. But I guess, yeah, no, that's the trend. Is the further north you go, the more extreme changes you're seeing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, is that one you can answer to? Why is that? the Arctic is increasing at an even faster rate than the average in the,
Yeah,
on the Earth.
I
This-
don't know the physics of why that is.
Okay.
It could be because it is starting out so much colder.
And
All
yet
right.
it's Miami that's flooding with the high tides and the neap tides, and they're the southernmost really. The northern cities aren't yet really flooding with each high tide.
Right. Well, that's a sea level rise issue, so it's not a temperature necessarily. So in terms of temperatures are changing more quickly the further north, the closer to the poles you get. The sea level rise is happening all over wherever there are coasts.
Okay.
Shall we move on?
Yeah, sounds good. We'll
Okay.
have another chance for questions a little
Yes.
in a few minutes. Great.
Okay, so that ends the gloom and doom part of the talk, and so things are gonna go up instead of down. Okay, here we go. So yes, I think we can all agree we need to change. So can we change? Well, we have the solutions at hand. So look at renewable energy. Wind energy was predicted to provide 30 gigawatts by 2010, but as of 2016, we had exceeded that prediction 16 times over. So things are really changing fast in regard to clean energy. We see an exponential curve when we look at the amount of wind energy being built around the world. And wind energy could supply 40 times more electricity than the entire world currently uses. So that's there, and there's a similar slide that talks about this for, so obviously that everyone knows that the sun has a huge amount of energy in it, right? And actually wind could provide that as well. And then solar energy is even more dramatic. 15 years ago, the best production was 1 gigawatt. And then by 2010, we exceeded that goal by 17 times. In 2016, we exceeded the goal by 75 times. And we see an exponential curve again in the amount of solar energy being installed around the world. In the meantime, the costs have gone down for computer chips. So just like with technologies like computer chips, cell phones, solar costs have fallen dramatically. And in many countries where there's no universal electricity grid, we're seeing consumers kind of leapfrog over that and install solar panels in places that haven't had access to electricity. And this I got from a talk by Catherine Hayhoe. If anyone, most of you have heard of Catherine Hayhoe. She's a CCL member who's a climate scientist, and she gives really incredible talks. And I guess she gives a really great TED talk, so you might want to look that up. But I learned from her the other day that solar panels, people often worry that solar panels might take up too much land. And so I'm on a local planning commission, and we were involved in some solar farms being put up. And sure enough, we get people come out, oh no, we don't want, what'll happen to the ground underneath, and we don't want these solar panels, they're an industrial site. So anyway, so these squares, there's two maps of squares, one in the Sahara and one in Texas. They show how big a solar farm would have to be in order to supply the entire world. So, and then if we look at this other map, this is a map that kind of takes all the land in the US and divides it up in terms of how much land is used for various industries or agricultural products or for whatever reason. And so the area needed for solar panels would take up the amount of area needed we currently use to make maple syrup or that we currently use for golf courses. So that was incredible to me. I feel like I need to look further into that, but I think that's amazing. And so let's look at Chile. Solar market took off slowly, but now look what's happening. And there's other regions in the world where this is happening and where this is possible. Chile's an incredible example. They have done some interesting policy apparently to make that happen. And so this shows the amount of new fossil fuel and renewable electricity capacity added in India between 2013 and 2020. So I know people often talk about how, well, why should the US do anything? The other countries aren't doing anything. So this is showing the projected timeline for wind and solar. And it's surpassing coal and gas as the cheapest kind of electricity. So I remember, again, back in the 70s when Carter put the solar panels on the roof of the White House, and we were all saying, oh yeah, solar would be a great idea, but it's way too expensive. So our projection is that these sources are going to be providing the cheapest energy. So battery storage, we need batteries, right? Because as our president says, you know, well, you can't watch the TV when the wind stops blowing. So battery storage is essential, and we are seeing projections that are showing that it is coming. Electric vehicles. All these automobile manufacturers are now offering or preparing to offer electric vehicles. So can we change? So I'm going to say yes. I think you guys are all thinking, yes, we can. Right? Yes. So will we change? That's the big question. Well, since we don't have anything going on at the federal level, at the local and state level, all of these countries, I wish they were countries, all of these states have committed to using 100% clean energy by 2050. So this is a global problem, but it has local solutions. And because we don't have a federal leadership, as we don't on other things, it's local land use decisions, local and state, that can help us. So we have these commitments from cities as well to 100% renewable electricity. These are already there. In Michigan, we have also cities that have committed to 100. I believe Grand Rapids is going to get there before 2025, last time I read. Ann Arbor in November declared a climate emergency and switched their commitment to 2030. And so we need global action to fight climate change and water quality. That's my Huron River Watershed Council talking. I haven't talked about land protection as a method, but land protection, protecting wetlands and forests helps to sequester and fix more carbon. So we need protecting our wetlands, our forests, our natural features. We can use green infrastructure to control our stormwater because we're going to be seeing more storms, and so we're going to need to control that. And then density in urban and urbanizing areas. How we live is very, very important in terms of how much energy is consumed. Living in more compact communities, using land more efficiently, not having to drive everywhere has an incredible impact on our greenhouse gas emissions. So we want to see where development happens. We want to see more development happening in those urban areas. And we don't want to see development continuing to happen out in the natural areas. For one, those natural areas should be busy sequestering carbon and protecting our water. And for another, people living in cities don't use nearly as much greenhouse gases as people living out in suburbs do. And so what can you do? Well, vote, right? Vote in your local elections, state, federal elections, vote for the climate, vote as an environmental voter, and then talk with friends and family about climate change. You know, I'm living in my world with other environmentalists. I work as an environmentalist. I think everybody knows about what's going on. I go out and talk to other people who aren't necessarily in my bubble, and no, I know people don't have that on their mind. It's kind of amazing. So really think about, all of you, where can you go to talk about climate and talk about it in a way that's not threatening to people who don't usually think about it. Think about it in a way, again, Catherine Hayhoe was talking about, when you talk to people about the safety of their children and children getting asthma. Are they worried about their grandchildren growing up in a world where we have this pandemic? And what are other pandemics that might happen in the future? I mean, it's going to affect every aspect of everyone's life. So there's going to be some way that you can talk to people about this. Find a climate reality leader to give a talk at any kind of group that you can get together. Contact your local, state, and federal elected officials. And I would, well, if you're mostly CCL people, you know all about HR 763, and if you don't, it's a piece of legislation that would put a price on carbon. It's one of many things that we need to do to bring our, fight climate change, but this is an actual bill that actually has a number and everything. And so I'm going to talk about that in a minute, a little bit more. But the two groups, as you know, that I've joined are the Climate Reality Project and the Citizens Climate Lobby. So those are two groups I urge everyone to take a look at. Okay, so how would a carbon price affect fossil fuel use? Why is that a particular piece of legislation that I think would be most helpful? So what CCL is promoting is the idea of having a fee on carbon, collecting that fee, and then returning that fee to all of the households in the US in the form of a dividend, kind of like the dividends they're giving out for this pandemic, kind of like Andrew Yang's dividend, right? And then also having a adjustment at the border so that, you know, countries that don't have a carbon price aren't flooding the market with cheaper products. So this is going to send a price signal right through the economy that will encourage people to purchase products that use less greenhouse gases. And it's going to incentivize green energy. So here's a map that shows the current, where new energy is being built, or I think that's what it shows. So you can see that in the middle, this is kind of neat actually, the middle of the state is mostly wind. But most of it is natural gas. And so if we had a price on carbon, this is what it would look like. Did that work? Are you guys seeing that? It doesn't look, yeah, there we go. You see, so there you see most of the country is on natural gas. Here you see most of the country ends up being on wind or solar. The colors are funny on my screen, so I hope you can see that. So, so the other big thing, and I think, so I'm hoping a lot of you folks live in Ann Arbor, and if you do, there's a very big vote coming up actually tomorrow night, Monday night, about the budget. And in the budget is to get started on Ann Arbor's living carbon neutrality plan. And so I urge you to please email City Council, tell them to fully support the carbon neutrality plan and sign the petition. Give you a minute to look at that. And if you, yeah, I'll give you a second to just look at that. So that's an immediate call to action for you. And then join those who are speaking out and making choices to fight the climate crisis, and use your voice, and your vote, and your choices, and speak truth to power like your word depends on it. Because your world depends on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kris. We have a question in the chat box from Larry. What actions can be taken by Michigan state government to act against climate change? What can our state government do?
That's good. So I know of one in particular that laid out in the carbon neutrality plan for the city of Ann Arbor, and that is to enact or to empower community choice. You guys probably can think of it better than me. Solar aggregation.
Climate.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Solar, but there's two things. One is community solar, and that's when you can get groups together, groups of households together to put solar, like say you've got houses where you can't fit the solar panels on the roof because there's trees in the way or for whatever reason, you can group households together and have community solar, so they can hook up their grids to So you basically have microgrids of solar, like little solar farms that will power those homes. And another one is community aggregate solar, is what it's called, or and so that allows aggregation of, it's kind of a larger version of that. And right now we can't do that. And because the city of Ann Arbor does not have its own energy utility, it has to rely on DTE to get its electricity. DTE is mostly powered right now by, I think, natural gas and coal. So it has to kind of lobby and try to get DTE Energy Company to become more green. Whereas it could, if there was state legislation to empower cities to do this, they could arrange to have more of their electricity come from solar or wind. So that's one thing. There are probably all kinds of things. And if you get in touch with the Michigan Climate Action Network, they probably have a list of legislative actions the state could take. Another thing would be, and that's something that we're kind of hoping will happen soon once, and this pandemic has kind of sidelined a lot of climate action on the part of, I think, various states and cities, is for the Michigan to declare 100% committed.
So talking to your state legislators about your interest in being
Yes.
more renewable and sustainable
Yes.
can help on all fronts, just so they know we've got their back as far as if they
Right,
vote
right.
in that direction. Because there are a lot of
Absolutely.
different fronts.
That they've got, that's a really good point, Clark, that we've got their back. And we learned this at the climate leadership training. If people have heard about the group Indivisible, so this is a group of former staffers who came out and they have a whole national movement now where they are training people how to use the power of their constituency, right, to influence their legislators, because the legislators are supposed to answer to the voters, and for us voters to realize that we do have the power to actually call them, contact them, email them, understand that we are voters and they do want our vote. And so we are actually a lot more influential, I think, with our legislators than sometimes we think we are. So I think being in contact with your legislators regularly is a more impactful thing than we think it is. And having their back. So in other words, if we're trying to get a legislator to back climate change, they might be hesitant to do that if they're in a particular district that they might think that, they're not, they may think they're too progressive, or they don't want to do something too seen as too progressive. But if they know that they have a lot of voters in their district who will have their back, as Clark says, and that will continue to vote for them, that's very helpful for them. Any other questions?
Any other questions?
Or ideas from other people? Do other people know? Are there other state laws or things that we can ask Gretchen Whitmer to do, or other cities that you know of who have gone or are working on carbon neutrality, universities?
Well, one, Kris, is the makeup of the Michigan Public Service Commission is important because they make decisions and they allow or don't allow utilities like Detroit Edison to have particular policies, and they control how much money they can invest in different things.
Right.
So I think Gretchen Whitmer has probably appointed 2 people on the Public Service Commission since she's been the governor. But
Okay.
but just that's another thing just to be aware of. That group has a lot of control, and the more we can make sure they're aware that the citizens want to go to a more sustainable system, the better off it is. Because the utilities I'm an engineer. I mean, I know that if they've got a system, it works nominally, it works fine. It doesn't count the externalities of what really happens when you burn coal. But from their world, they put in some coal and they get out energy. And
Right.
if it's measured by that, they're good to go with continuing with coal plants, and then it's just great if they switch to gas. That's still meets those simple requirements. If you keep it down to money in for the fuel, I should say, not including the cost of health and our breathing problems and water problems.
Right.
But
And
so-
I'm trying to find, they just had there was just news that came down that they had a decision against DTE on that, related to that they couldn't use they couldn't, I can't remember. Does anybody remember? I just saw an email about it, that the this Energy Commission, what's it called again, Clark? Michigan
Public Service
Services
Commission?
Yeah, the
Michigan
Public Service Commission
Service.
ruled against DTE for a rate increase and also for using a coal plant. So I think there's a coal plant in Michigan that's going to be seeing its last days soon. So that was a big win. And I guess I must have deleted that email. So there are a lot of good things going on despite the pandemic and despite the national situation. I think that it's kind of a race between those curves that I showed at the beginning and the end. So we just need to keep working at it.
Actually, it says that DTE won that court case
Really?
on April 3rd. And it had to do with DTE and consumers' energy at the cost of large energy users such as US Steel. I just
This
glanced
must
at
be another different one.
that. Maybe that's a different one. That was April
Yeah.
3rd.
Yeah, I think there might have
Higher
been something
prices
more
for
recent.
industry.
Well, we'll all have to try to look that one up.
Yeah, yeah.
But
That
you're
was
right. It's very important what happens on the utility front.
right.
And Traverse City has its own. It doesn't. I think it either has its own utility or there's a small regional utility that they persuaded to go clean energy. So it's very important. It's a very important question, and the question's been put to Ann Arbor City over whether they should try to make their own utility. But
Like Lansing has, they have the Board of Water and Light.
That's right.
So the city has a lot more control over their
Yep.
energy system.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, Leah suggests that we send some information around about cities and what steps cities and states can take.
Mm-hmm.
So Kris, you and I can talk about
Great.
that.
Yeah. I mean, when the Ann Arbor Zero put out their carbon neutrality plan, I was just like, do this. So I really hope it passes at city council, or that the city can start working on it. And I feel like it has a really good, it's very comprehensive and it's very step by step. And I think other cities could really use it as a model in Michigan.
Okay, great. We'll be on for just a few minutes here if people think of other questions. I just want to thank Kris for coming and telling us about what the impact to the water systems. Thanks, Kris. It's a little hard to clap. Next week, well, we've got 3 more programs planned. Next week, same time, will be climate strategies and what actions will keep us at 1.5 to 2 degrees C of temperature rise. The following, I'm sorry, not next week. We skip next week because it's Memorial Day. So in 2 weeks,
What's that, honey?
climate strategies. How do we stay at 1.5 degrees? And then 3 weeks from now, there'll be
Okay, honey.
pollution pricing as a climate justice tool. That will be Ann Ellingson. And then finally on June 14th, we'll have climate trivia night where we'll have prizes. And those of you, you know your trivia about climate, or not trivia, it's not really trivial, but it's important. You can come in and you can join in as a team if you want. So a little bit more about next week. We're going to evaluate we have a simulator that was developed by MIT that we can try different scenarios of a carbon tax or doing more tree planting or putting a tax on coal. But we can look at all those different things and evaluate what their impact is. So we'll have some interaction with the audience in 2 weeks to figure out what it would take to get to 1.5 or 2 degrees C. And we actually do have strategies that will get us there. So that's very promising. If ever anybody's interested in the Ann Arbor chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby, they do have a meeting on the second Saturday of the month. It pre-COVID used to be held at the downtown library in Ann Arbor, but now it's an online meeting. So that's the second Saturday if you're interested. And then at those meetings, there's more discussion about who to talk to and particular strategies on contacting legislators and what kind of activities the National Citizens Climate Lobby is planning, which, by the way, will be a virtual and some online lobby meetings with legislators in June. I think that's all I have. If there's nothing else, any other questions? Okay, well, we'll see those of you that are interested in 2 weeks. It'll be on the same Zoom channel. And if you sign up on the Eventbrite, you'll get an invitation so that you'll be sure not to miss it. And thanks again, Kris, for
You're welcome. Thank you.
putting this together.
Everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye. Clark, I like that beard you're growing.
Yeah, the COVID world.
I don't think I can make it past the 2-week point. That's the itching point.
Yeah. We'll see if it lasts.
And you got to get past it, right? And then it's okay after that?
Exactly.
Happens?
Exactly. I got past it once. I got past it once and I stayed with it for 35 years.
Wow.
Yep. But those days are gone.
Yep.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Good night. Thanks, Kris. Thanks, Nadine.